It looks like we got everybody here. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a work session meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council held on September the 29th. If the city clerk would please go ahead and do the roll call.
Yes, Mayor. Council members Judith Chandler,
Present.
John Shada,
Here.
Julie Wolf, okay, I didn't hear you, but I can see you, Julie.
Julie, we can't hear you, Julie.
Okay. No volume, we can't hear you. Let me finish with the roll call.
Just the roll call, yeah.
Councilor Susan Woolbrook.
Here.
Thank you. Councilor Steve Bremner.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune.
Present.
And Mayor John Graham.
Here. And can we see if we can get the audio okay with Julie? Can anyone hear Julie?
No.
No, no one
Do
here.
you want to try calling in, Julie? Or you're going to jump off? Okay.
Okay. Okay, while we're waiting for that, in looking at the agenda, since the agenda was published, we became aware of something that I'd like you to consider. The architect with Echo Architecture, the consultant for the Hiawatha Gardens, Ryan, he will be available from 6 to 7 o'clock tonight. So I would propose that the order of the agenda be changed so we can take advantage of that. I would suggest that if there's no objection, that we transpose the first item, the update on the administrative abatement of 121 Pawnee, with the last item, which is the Hiawatha Gardens. Hiawatha Gardens would then be first, and we would follow the order 2, 3, and 4, those items as presented, and then end up with the Pawnee Avenue situation. Are there any objections?
Can anyone hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we can hear you, Julie.
Oh, good. I just logged back in. Okay, well, I'm here.
Okay. Julie, what I was just saying is, it turns out the architect for Echo Architecture, they're the people that have been consulted on Hiawatha Gardens. He'll be available from 6 to 7 o'clock tonight. So I'd suggest that we do the Hiawatha Gardens first so that we can take advantage of his availability. And then we just trade the item that's been published as first, the 121 Pawnee update, make that last. If that's okay with everybody, we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started then with the Hiawatha Gardens updates. The presentation by Laura Newman. So Judy, if you can bring Laura in.
Mayor, I think you want to bring Ryan in, Roy in, Christina in, because Ryan needs to present first because he has a limited time to just talk about what his findings are.
Alrighty. Okay, so
There we go. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Ryan Lloyd with Echo Architecture, and not sure why my video is so bad, but I am really just here for support and answering questions. I hadn't prepared any sort of presentations, so I think Laura can go ahead. And I'm like I said, I'm here and happy to answer questions, but don't really have anything prepared to present today.
we'll likely have questions. Laura, if that's okay, can we turn this over to you?
Certainly, and thank you, Mayor Graham and City Council members. And there should be a PowerPoint that was in your packet. I don't know if it's going to display on the screen, but perhaps I should just touch on the highlights within the PowerPoint. Everyone received it, correct? Okay.
Laura,
And
we can have Judy pull it up if you want her to. The city clerk can pull it up.
I maybe that's good just to point out some of the highlights. And again, I'm here strictly to provide some history to the newest members on City Council. to the best of my ability. I was a paid consultant for the city of Manitou Springs for about 2 years. I did conclude, sorry, nice. I did conclude my assignment in March of 2020. I'm gonna have to leave this room. We've had a bear in our neighborhood, so excuse me. I'll walk out here. I did conclude my assignment in March of 2020, but Denise and Roy and Christine thought it was important that I come back and just put some perspective on the history of Hiawatha Gardens. And on the first 2 slides, you can see the history of the building and the important role it has played in our city for over the past 120 years. Thank you, Judy, for bringing that up. And I think it's probably important if we could go to the next slide in the photographs.
One second here, okay.
Thank you. I think it's just important to point out that it's been in our community for a long time. And if you refer to an email that Ann Nichols sent all of City Council and talks about, and she was a member of both Task Force 1 and Task Force 2 on Hiawatha Gardens that I will touch on briefly. It'll tell you a little bit about the history of the building being in the historic district, as well as the value of potentially putting it back in the historic district. And I don't know if we want to reference that email or include it, but it was sent to a number of people, so I just wanted to make sure that that was referenced during our conversation. We can skip over that next slide that has the structure, because there's going to be a new photograph that's shared with all of you tonight that talks about the demolition plan. So I think it will be important for you to look at that diagram and not this one, which was the original one back in 2016. But important to note on Task Force 1, which dates back almost 5 years ago, by the way. So there's been work by a group of very passionate citizens for nearly 5 years. And a group by the name of Community Matters did a presentation to City Council. I think all of you probably know that the property was purchased for a little over $1 million, and there's still some debt outstanding on the building. I won't go down that path unless asked, but it was purchased in January of 2016. There were some public meetings that were held. There was that Task Force 1 formed. And both Ann Nichols and Neil Minch were members of Hiawatha Gardens Task Force 1, as well as Hiawatha Gardens Task Force 2. Moving on to Task Force 2, that next slide, if you would please. There's a lot of dates in here, and I'm going to try to point out the ones that I think that that are relevant to all of you. Is that we have access, the city had access to some PPRTA monies, and so we engaged the firm of Kimley Horn, which you will recognize the name. They've been engaged on a number of projects, but we asked them to do some work as it related to putting parking structures on the Hiawatha Garden site, both with and without the building. We did form Task Force 2. If it's important to you, I can tell you who those individuals are. Worked for nearly 2 years on a lot of vetting of different proposals that I can go into, as well as City Council passing a resolution and so forth. There was a flood in the summer of 2018. We had some mitigation work done. There was the desire at the time to think bigger than just what should we do with Hiawatha Gardens, but to have a comprehensive what we were calling then a mobility group. It turned out to be the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan. And so there was a group focused for flying a little bit higher than just on the building. Back in August of 2018, a set of givens were adopted by City Council. There's a slide on that if we want to refer to it. And a number of community conversations began. Then we issued the parking study by Kimley Horn in November. And we held another community engagement in November about the potential uses of the building. And then we released that survey to the citizens in February of 2019. I've done a number of presentations to City Council. You can see there. I wanted to make notion of, because sometimes there's questions about why did we put a new roof on this building that was paid for by a hail damage claim, and that's the reason that new roof went on in June of 2019. Again, another presentation to City Council. And then moving to the next slide, if we could please. Is the next slide? Oh, okay. So this is the set of givens that were adopted in August of 2018. And basically what it was saying is just, this was a guideline. This was before the resolution was passed about a year later. And this was basically in a nutshell saying we're going to continue to preserve the building until we decide what we're going to do with it. But since it was purchased with PPRTA monies, which involve transportation, that the site will serve as a form of transportational support. And then it also talks about the mobility study and all the different projects that could intersect with that. Moving on to the next slide, continues the historical review. We did consciously decide to pause on talking about Hiawatha Gardens until the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan was finalized. In July of 19, we did approve a contract for some asbestos abatement within the building, which, by the way, as well as some masonry work that was considered structural, is that we would have to do the abatement work regardless of whether the building stayed as is or was torn down. And so that was the reason. And we also were going by our givens, right, that said that we were going to maintain the building until the future was decided. We also, you'll note, approved, City Council approved to get a demo plan in order. Now, that demo plan seemed to take a long time, and Christine's going to present that for a number of different reasons. There was some staff transition, there was COVID, et cetera. And so the demo plan that we got approval for is just now going to be presented to you this evening, which I believe all was in your packet. Then in July, some more City Council discussion, and there was a formal resolution passed in August of 2019 where that presiding City Council agreed to retain the historically relevant portions of the building. We did some beautification efforts, you can see, in the fall, and then we presented earlier this year the Transportation and Mobility Master Plan, as well as some very comprehensive phase 1 recommendations in February. And then, of course, our world changed with COVID-19 in March. And although some of those phase 1, I must add, and you probably already know, Roy Chaney took the bull by the horns and progressed in doing some really great work within the city. So, so that brings us really to today. And if we could move to the next slide. Back in February, we did make some recommendations to City Council. We did not take action on, I don't think that we took action on any of these items. And Denise, please correct me if I'm wrong, because in early March, we had the start of the pandemic. And so we made these recommendations and did not move forward. Am I correct? I see her shaking her head, so I'm going to say yes. Moving on to the next slide. These slides are important, and we'll go quickly through them. I think regardless of the outcome of tonight's work session and discussion, it's very important that you recognize that not only did a number of city staff and citizens work on Hiawatha Gardens for nearly the past 5 years, there's been a considerable community engagement. And some may question, okay, there were 25 here, 65 there, 120 filled out the survey, I think it was 123. Does that really representative of the community? And statistically it is. There was a lot of engagement. So I just wanted to present that to you. That was led by Susan Watkins and Tweed Keziah, which I think most of you do know. Their background is in communication and citizen engagement. And so very quickly, and I'll turn my own pages here. So I get, this is the open house that occurred with 65 participants. You can see there was a lot of excitement around potential community uses, and you can see what they were concerned about, cost and not enough parking. And so you can see that particular slide. The next one, which is focus on potential building uses. This is important for you to see, but I do want you to know that that was not the focus. The focus of what the building is going to be in the future was something to have dialogue around, but it was never the intention or the outcome of those particular meetings. I'd recommend that there needs to be more of that, depending on your decision, to make sure that there is enough engagement about potential building uses, as well as funding opportunities and considerable partnerships that might be involved. The next slide. Those are the givens and the process in which we followed. And the next slide, please, Judy, and thank you for guiding me through this. More focus on the potential building uses, and this was done via a survey that was released at the end of last year. You can see what the first choice was by the 123 participants. And moving on to the next, you can see the retain the building options versus removing the building, kind of a 3-to-1 on this survey. And the next slide are some statements that you can see about the support of retaining the building, wanting it to have some sort of community use, as well as transportation use in some way, parking, multimodal, et cetera. Premature to draw conclusions about what the community use should be. I already said that. The need for additional parking seems to be the primary reason for those who advocate removing the building. And then if we could go to, there's something I wanted to add to that. Oh, I wanted to add that what did not appear in my slideshow is there was a lot of conversation about retention of this historic site because it's in line with the 2012 Vision and Planning Guide, as well as Plan Manitou. And those two items were not really called out in my particular slideshow. And I also want to make mention, in addition to Ann Nichols, Ken Geray sent a pretty lengthy email on September 26th to all of council and some additional people that outlined his recommendations for next steps to the group. There may have been additional citizen input prior to this meeting, but those are the two documents that are two emails that were shared specifically with me that I wanted to make mention. So I'll pause. I did that quickly because I know you want to talk about the options, and I'll ask anyone who's on the phone, particularly city staff with Roy and Christine and Denise, is there anything you'd like to supplement of my history?
I think then Christine has, she has some remarks to make. Is that, I think it'd be appropriate to move to Christine now.
Sure, I'd be happy
Christine?
to
Yeah, okay, great.
transition us into the next phase. So in your packet, and if it's okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen because the next phase of the packet is there. So I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, Laura, very much. That was spot on. Just a moment. Okay, so I came on to the city in late February. In August, I was asked to find out where things had been left with regard to moving the building forward based on citizen input. And so I reached out to Ryan Lloyd, who's on the screen with us from Echo Architecture. And as Ryan and I were speaking, learned that there had been some additional information, perhaps it wasn't new, just some expansion of information known about the condition of the site that seemed worth sharing. So on August 29th, this memo that all of you at City Council, I believe, received and was included in the packet basically just stated that that's where we were and that's what we were doing. And we anticipated that the first week of September, Echo Architecture and some folks from at least one demo team would come and look to see what would be necessary to either keep the building intact. If we build a structure around it, what does that look like? What Ryan had shared with us, and I'll probably turn it over to him in just a moment, ask him just to speak just a little bit more. The field note from his group is in this packet, but basically was that the underlying groundwater and creek conditions further destabilized the general structure. And that made it particularly challenging to consider what was called before a selective work or selective construction work. And so that field report was here in this packet. And here is a floor plan. I think what I'd like to do, Ryan, would you mind walking us through this just a little bit?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so Christine's exactly right. We had kind of re-engaged with the project just very quickly. We had analyzed the building for the city, I think back in 2012, and over the years have created a few reports and been in the building. But when we were hired to provide the documentation for the selective demolition in 2019, we hadn't been in the building for 3 years. We did do a site visit in February of 2020, and what we had discovered, a few items that were surprising and unfortunate. This field, I don't know if you can see my mouse. You probably can't. The field report item number 3 on the north side of the building, or the right side, that's the portion of the building that hangs over the creek. The flood in 2018 had seriously undermined the existing rubble and stone foundation under that area. And you can go to the site today and see that portion of the building is significantly leaning to the north over the creek. Providing selective demolition of that area is going to be extremely difficult. It either needs to be repaired with a new foundation or come down. But the cost of repairing it with a new foundation is prohibitive, as I mentioned in my report. The issues with FEMA of working over a creek complicates it. Getting under an existing building to put a new foundation in complicates it. And the unknowns of the condition of the bank walls to the upstream of the property are concerning, because this is something that can continue to happen. So that's the biggest point of concern with the building is the piece over the creek. And we always knew that, but we had, in the pre-Waldo Canyon fire world, it wasn't that high on it was high on the list, but it wasn't where it is today, unfortunately. The areas on the east and west that say the big additions text, those we can take down anytime, inexpensively and efficiently, without really causing any damage to the building. And the same can be said for that addition to the south on the plan left. The other things, 2 items that were of concern that we found were in structure number 2. The asbestos and mold mitigation that had occurred opened the building up quite a bit and allowed us to see more damage than we had been expecting. And then the second floor over structure number 2, which is on the west side of that portion, when they mitigated the asbestos, they somehow, and I don't understand why, but they had cut the floor joists that connected to the west wall of structure 2. plan down. That structure was providing a structural diaphragm for that west wall. And having cut those, I have significant concerns, as does my structural engineer, of the integrity of really the entirety of structure number 2, especially the western portion of it. In addition to that, as you probably know, the flooding in 2018 also came down the hill and inundated the basement of structure number 2 and caused significant damage to the existing foundation walls and the existing wood structure down there. So that was our findings in February that were of concern, of course. We were working with Christine's predecessor at the time, and literally the day we toured the building was her last day, or the day before her last day. I think communication didn't get passed on to Christine. I'm sure it didn't. And then that plus the addition of COVID, we had internally put the project on hold. And when Christine reached out about a month ago, we re-engaged. So that's kind of the probably long-winded history of the last couple of years on this project for ECHO. In addition to that, most recently we toured the building with D2 Demolition. It's Kevin Murphy's demolition company. He's put together cost estimates for the various demolition options that we proposed. And that includes demolition of the east and west additions, east, west, and south additions, and also the addition over the creek, which you can see in front of you here. It's a little hard to get exact numbers because they broke out backfill, stream protection, erosion control, which percentages of which would be applied to the demolition of each portion. So it's not real easy to get to full numbers on this, but you can definitely see the order of magnitude of the different options.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Mayor Graham.
Ryan, a question. In the council packet, we have just the 2 options here and plus the addendum. If you could go to the floor plan and show us exactly what you're talking about or what they're talking about taking off, just so we could be clear.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pull that.
I can.
See the
I've got the 2 options in front of me here. I could read them to you. Option 2, this is from the city's memorandum. Remove entire 1- and 2-story commercial building in southernmost addition with associated construction costs. I gather that means to level the whole building. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. Then option 3, remove north and east additions only with associated construction costs. So as I'm looking at the floor plan here, to me, I believe east is at the top here. Although as you were just briefing this, I was a little confused. Is that your understanding? We have east at the top, north to the left?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So
And
okay.
I'm sorry. I think I was saying north was to the right. I had that backwards.
Okay. I just wanted to
yeah.
clarify that.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I see that either. That's okay. That's good. Okay. So remove the north and east additions. Well, I think we understand the east addition would be that light blue portion above the green block.
Correct.
Okay. And then when we talk about the north additions, are we talking about everything to the left of the green block or just a portion?
Just the blue portion.
Just the blue portion. So structure 2 and the link would remain. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay. So that's what we mean there.
Just to be clear, structure 1 is the historic ballroom with the floating dance floor. Structure 2 is also a historic building built in 1921. All the blue addition, everything in blue was built in the 50s and on, and we don't consider significant.
So that was where I needed some clarification. I guess at this point, it would be fruitful to ask City Council if they have questions. Or Denise, you've got your hand up.
I
What's
just,
your,
point of clarification, number one, you said it's to demolish the entire part. I think except for the southernmost addition. So it's 85.5 to demolish everything but that, and then you add an additional 16.8 to demolish that southern addition, is that correct?
I was looking at
I'm pulling that up now.
As you say on, for removal of entire 1 and 2 commercial building except southernmost addition. So I assume that that's right there by the creek that you're not. And then to get that demolished would be the additional 16.8.
By the time that information got into the council packet in the memorandum sheet, it talks about removing the entire 1 and 2 story commercial building, including the southernmost addition. So that apparently was added back in.
Okay,
And I see it
thank you.
total cost there of
Mhm.
$144,800.
So it's adding together some of the various costs so that it was easier to understand. Because as Ryan mentioned a moment ago, the backfill and some of the stormwater, those were broken out. So to be able to give us some orders of magnitude in totality to understand.
Great, that's helpful.
Yeah, and according to my numbers, or at least my calculations, the cost to demolish the entire site is $128,000.
I'm showing a little more, but that included, then there were several other things added in there on that D2 demo bid. Okay, so if we remove the north and east portions, where basically we would still see structure 2, the link structure 1, and the portion to the blue portion to the right, to the south there next to the creek. Okay. All righty. Council, do you have questions for Ryan?
I'll add one more thing quickly. The demolition estimates are strictly demolition. If we do proceed with the selected demolition, there will be costs to come back in and build walls at the existing historic buildings and to waterproof it and make it watertight and visually acceptable for the community.
Council, do we have questions for Ryan? Do you have questions?
I do.
Okay, Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, Ryan, this is kind of a silly question, but I just thought I should make sure. I'm assuming if we demo the building and rebuild something, then we have no right to get any historical funds. Is that correct?
That is correct. And in addition to that, if we bring the building into the historic district, we're exempt from quite a few of the floodplain requirements. And that could be viewed as good or bad. Obviously, we have some floodplain issues that we need to mitigate regardless of code and requirements. But the benefits of bringing this into the historic district are grants and financial assistance and exemption from some expensive requirements to build in the floodplain.
And is there any information, do you know, about, what percent of the building we could anticipate would be funded through historical grants if we happen to go that route?
There's really no way to even guess without knowing what the extent of work and product type that we'd be putting in the building. So it's almost impossible to even estimate.
And this is kind of related, but not totally on point. Can you clarify, who are we paying the mortgage to? Who do we pay?
Denise, maybe that's a question you could answer.
Becca, are you on? I can look it up, but Becca, do you know that real quick?
Is it the people who sold us the property? I don't need their name, but is it a seller? Is it an owner, Carrie?
Yes, I believe
Yes.
so. Yes.
What's the interest rate?
Mm.
I'm thinking, Julie, off the top of my head, I think I saw 3%.
I am moving Becca onto the panelist side, so.
But
Yes, it is a lease purchase through the owner, and I do believe the Mayor Graham is correct that it is a 3%.
If it's a lease purchase, that means it's not titled in our name until it's paid in full. Is that right?
I would have to
That's-
double check that, but I think that's correct.
I mean, lease purchase means that we don't own it until we've paid the last penny. So I just wanted to confirm, because if it's really not in the name of the city, if it's still technically titled in the name of the seller, I would imagine that might cause some problems with a grant request, but maybe not.
Maybe I misspoke on the instrument, because we are not paying property tax on it. So it is considered tax exempt. So therefore it has to be under the city name.
Oh, then it's not a lease purchase. Okay, but the rate is 3%. Is it like what is it? Like a 30-year fixed rate or what? Do you know?
20 year.
Fixed?
Yes.
Is it fixed? And there's
We
no
pay it.
balloon, it's just 20 years straight?
That is correct.
Thank you. You're the lady with the answers.
Counselor Chandler?
Thank you. So I just want to be really clear on what the term historically relevant means. I've had a number of conversations with people, including someone who came over to my house for an hour and a half talking about Hiawatha Gardens. So it's my understanding that the structure one, the 7,436 square feet built in 1900, is historically relevant. Is structure two and the link both built around 1921? Are they both considered part of the historically relevant structures?
Structure 2 is, yes. The link is not. Those were two freestanding buildings when they were originally built.
Okay, so when the community overwhelmingly told the city that it wanted to preserve the historically relevant portions, I can assume that that is structure one and structure two. Is
That's
that correct?
Yes.
But you said that structure two has some significant issues because of the joists that were cut and so on. Is that rendering it structure, and I'm just talking about structure two, is that rendering it less likely to be preserved or not necessarily so?
From a financial standpoint, yes, it will be. The foundation and basement issues are more significant than the second floor issues, but the condition it's in currently, it's going to be it's a very expensive building to preserve.
So could a case be made for making the historically relevant portion just structure one, built in 1900, the 7,436 square feet, and demolishing the
I could see that case being made pretty easily. The structure one is certainly has more history. It's older. More famous people were there. People in your community remember attending it. Structure two is really support, and I could see making the argument that it's, if not historically insignificant, at least less significant than structure number one.
And last question, we do not have figures on what it would cost us to just preserve structure one and demolish everything else at this point.
We don't. To get that from a demolition perspective would be very quick. The preservation of structure one. Let me back up. We don't have current 2020 numbers on preservation of any of the structures. The last time we ran estimates was 2012. And not only is the construction, not only has there been significant inflation in construction costs, the building has deteriorated. So those numbers really aren't relevant today. But from a demolition perspective, we could get numbers on structure number 2 very quickly.
I would be in favor of seeing those numbers if other members of council would also like to see those numbers.
I propose that at this point, since we've got about 20 minutes left of Ryan's time, we can maybe quickly go around the table and get kind of try to take the temperature from various council people and then see what questions we still have for Ryan. So
Thank you.
thank you, Judith. Mayor Pro Tem, can we get your thoughts?
Sure. And you're asking for just in general, right? Not specific questions for Ryan?
I think, yeah, in general here, so we can get a sense of where we
Okay.
want to go next.
Absolutely. My general impressions are we've been on a long, steady, very methodical march to get to this point. I went back to Ken's email, and I'm very supportive of his suggestions that we pass a resolution directing staff to investigate and implement the restoration of the historic aspects of Hiawatha Gardens, the historic aspects, but I would also like to know the demolition of building 2, because I think that at this point is potentially problematic. And then pass a resolution, include in that resolution to ask about the $500,000 toward the creation of the mobility hub and amenities at Hiawatha Gardens, and to appoint/reappoint something like Task Force 2 and community staff and community members to guide and the funding and restoration process. To that, I would add that we hire a project manager to help develop this, put it back in the historic district. And I would also say that we put a 6 to 9 month deadline for them to come back with an action plan. But my absolute preference is to restore the building as quickly as possible and make that decision. One of the things that happened with Task Force 2 is just getting wrapped around the axle because no decisions could be made on either the parking garage or the building. And because we kept kicking the can. And if we just make the decision now, we will retain and restore the historically significant aspects of the structure. Then the parking garage or the parking lot can become a separate issue. And it just narrows the choices and provides good direction to staff. So that's where I am very strongly. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilor Bremner, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm still open-minded. I'm kind of new to the process. My first impressions were to demolish it and make room for the potential parking garage. And I'm still inclined towards that direction, but based on all the input of the community wanting to preserve it, I would probably acquiesce to that if there's enough sentiment towards that direction. But my impressions are I don't think it's that aesthetic of a building, and I think it might be in the way of the parking garage. So that's my initial thoughts, but I'm still open-minded. That's all.
Okay, great, thank you, Steve. Councilor Wilbrook?
Thank you, Mayor. I have one question before I make my comments. There's been a lot of emails that have come, but no one's told me why it was removed from the historic district, and I didn't have time to go search the minutes for that today. Can someone, like perhaps Christine, tell us why? There must have been something in the minutes why council voted to do that. I'd just like to know what it was.
I don't have the answer to that question, Councilor Wilbrook. I wasn't here when that occurred. I saw an email come through earlier that inquired about that and did not have an opportunity to look into it. There may be someone here who has more information on that, but I'm happy to look into that and come back with an answer for you.
Okay, Laura Newman looks like she might have an answer.
I don't know that I have the answer, but in the email that Ann Nichols said, it was removed some years ago when the district boundaries were reduced. I don't know why the district boundaries were reduced, but that was why the building was excluded, and I can try to find an answer while we're still on the phone for you.
Well, I saw that in Ann Nichols' thing, but it felt like from other emails that I got that it was something beyond that. So if it's
Okay, let me see
if it's
if I can find
beyond
out.
that, good. If it's just a reduction, then that would be the answer.
And I'll jump in, and I could be mistaken, but I don't think it's ever been in the historic district. The boundary stopped at the edge of Memorial Park, and I want to say 3 years ago, we met with the state the Manitou Historic Board, and they voted to include it, but I don't think it ever happened. So that's my recollection, and I could be wrong, but I don't think it's ever been.
Okay. My concerns about Hiawatha Garden are the same as I've stated before. It's very costly to maintain this building right now, and that's a serious consideration. I mean, meaning when I say maintain it, just maintain it to continue to get rid of hazardous materials, to secure it. And I think that since we've taken parking in-house, we have changed a little bit from when we talked about parking structures. We now have in-house parking, and I think that Roy and Kevin and their team, along with other city staff members, including Christine and our engineering department, are really trying to look at what spaces we have in town and how do we use them smartly before we make any decisions about constructing a parking garage. And I'm not saying it won't happen or it will happen. I'm just saying that that's really different from when Nancy and I sat on the previous council and we looked at this. So I feel like that's something that we need to take a pause on and get more information as parking continues to roll out a management plan for not just downtown, but maybe even all of Manitou. We need to kind of know more information about that. One of the things that I've always advocated for this and other projects like this in town is that I understand what everyone's saying about the level of community engagement and how statistically it's good, you know, pretty representative of the community. But to me, you know, nothing would make me happier than for us to put this, you know, on a ballot, and actually for citizens to put it on a ballot would be more ideal than council putting it on a ballot, and really ask the whole community what you want to do with this, because we have 3 buildings that we're trying to maintain that haven't really been maintained to the way that perhaps we wish they had been maintained. And that's not only Hiawatha, it's City Hall and it's the Carnegie Building, and I'm probably leaving out some buildings. I'm sure there's people that would pipe up. And all 3 of those buildings, you know, we have to make some decisions about at some point. And this also goes into the discussion that we had many times in the previous council about just taking one item and looking at it without looking at the whole capital improvement picture. And we still haven't done that. I know staff is working on that. It's definitely a goal for them. But I'd like to see our citizens see some things that need to be repaired, restored, replaced. And I'd like to have some method of looking at them holistically instead of piecemeal, which has always been one of my big issues about the way we've gone about these types of things. So these are comments that I've made before. They're not significantly different. I think that when we go through budget and as we continue to see what COVID-19 does, we'll know a little bit more about the monies that we have or don't have. I don't know what we would put in this building. I understand that there's this whole argument about a mobility hub, and I'm not opposed to that, but we haven't secured private investors for any of this, which might be a way that we could do it. So I have as many questions as I've always had. I do appreciate this presentation. It's been comprehensive. I do understand the options that have been presented for us to contemplate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wilbrook. Councilor Wolf, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I would like to see a comprehensive plan for the entire area on how this would fit in. Because right now it's this ugly building surrounded by, you know, concrete or whatever that is, cement. And it's just ugly. And I would like to see how this fits into a larger plan on how it's going to connect with the park. In that case, I think the building could be saved and used as an important hub and bathroom area. The one little outdoor bathroom outside of City Hall is inadequate. I'd like to look more at a comprehensive plan that takes into account the entire space. And I have actually seen some initial rendition drawings of that John Shada shared with me. I hope it's okay that I'm mentioning that here. So I'd be in favor of it as long as it's part of a bigger plan and not just looking at the building itself. And then it sounds to me like it does make sense to put the property into or back into, whatever the case may be, the historic district. If we are going to go forward on preserving any portion of the building, so that we can get around some of the more strict floodplain requirements and to enable us to get funding.
Thank you. Councilor Shada?
I'm 100% behind Mayor Pro Tem Fortune's plan to move ahead. I think I would add essentially Julie Wolf's comments that that task force that would be reinvigorated would essentially cast their net a little bit larger in terms of to the surrounding area, in terms of how essentially, as I understand it, and Nancy, maybe you can kind of chime in. I'm assuming your proposal is primarily to preserve Structure 1. Is that correct?
To preserve what? I'm sorry?
Is to preserve Structure 1.
Yeah, I would ideally like to do 2 as well, but I didn't realize, the new information for me is the damage that was done, which is rather shocking to me that the joists were cut, and that just bewilders me that they ultimately damaged the building and made it less valuable to us potentially. I knew about the undermining, but anyway, so yes, at a minimum, I would like to keep 1, and I could probably live with that if it comes to that. But I would look to the task force to come back with a solid recommendation to us on that, on building 2. But yeah, at a minimum, building 1.
So to be brief, I guess I support Nancy's proposal essentially, and possibly that assessment in Nancy's proposal would be to get really a firm handle on, have we kind of damaged Structure 2 beyond repair, okay? And let that be essentially the task force, ability to kind of evaluate that. But I'd like to kind of emphasize kind of what Julie Wolf said, which was essentially trying to also understand the much bigger picture than only just this silo. And in other words, how does this property relate to Memorial Park? How does this property kind of relate to the adjoining neighborhood to the north? Okay, and really envision sort of just a real robust plan for this site as it relates to its surrounding area.
Thank you, John. Councilor Chandler?
Thank you. I was only able to ask some clarification questions, but I didn't get an opportunity to weigh in on my thoughts. First of all, I'd like to remind everyone on council that the citizens of Manitou spoke very clearly to us on what they wanted to see happen here. I am absolutely 100% in favor of putting this property back, well, in the historic district if it wasn't there in the first place, and back in if it was. I wholly support Mayor Pro Tem Fortune's proposal that we preserve the historically relevant structures, with the exception of Structure 2 if it is cost prohibitive. So certainly at least Structure 1. And I'd also like to say that I had a really robust conversation with some people from Pac-Man who came over to my house on Sunday, and we talked about the topic of what kind of tourists do we want to attract. And I don't go to other locations to look at their parking garages. I go to look at their culture. And I think it would be a huge mistake if we didn't take a look at how we could build a community and transportation hub around this historic building and make it very physically appealing, a place that people want to gather. I think Councilor Shada has some tremendous ideas, as do others. And I do also agree with Mayor Pro Tem Fortune that we put the parking garage issue aside and focus on this one issue, because I think we tend to group the two together and get a little confused, that we focus on this. So I am very much supporting of the resolution and moving forward with preserving the historically relevant portions of this building. Because once it's gone, just like the trees. Once they're gone, they're gone. Thank you.
Denise, real quick, and then I'm going to make comments too.
I just received an email from Lauren Newman that I want to share. She says that it was in the historical district. The district went way east and the decision was made to consolidate it. The chair of HPC at the time has said that they should not have done that, and they did not really explore its historical significance before they took that action. So I just wanted to share that.
Good. Thank you. Okay, well, I haven't commented yet, and I guess I diverge from the majority of you. I see a lot of expense with the building as it is. This looks to me like a money pit. I am not really. I'm pretty skeptical about the ability to salvage the building at any reasonable cost. And we're in, I think, an environment in a city that we don't have a lot of excess money. If we did, we wouldn't be having this problem. We just write checks and fix things that way, but we don't, and we haven't. And I don't see that that's going to change anytime in the near future. We've got several buildings that need attention. Certainly, the Carnegie Library is an important building that has strong public support. City Hall needs attention. The Hiawatha Gardens, I think, are in my mind, they're a lost cause. Several times in the last couple of years, I've had conversations with Chuck Murphy. He's the guy that did the rehab on the spa building, the Manatee Spa building, the Cliff House, the Barker House, at 515 Manitou Avenue, along with other buildings. And several times in conversations, he mentioned to me as an aside that he thought the Hiawatha Gardens was beyond hope. So to not consider his expertise or the expertise of someone with his background, I think that would be reckless. The idea that there's broad public support for this, I think the way this was sampled, the people who were interested in this kind of thing responded, and those who were just basic taxpayers tended to not pay attention. I know that after this last election in November and until about Christmas, I had people voluntarily telling me why they didn't vote for the match proposal, and oftentimes it was the Hiawatha Gardens. So I don't think there's the support out there in the community that the data is presented would indicate. Now, all that said, I could see taking a certain amount of time, a finite amount of time, 3 to 6 months, and trying to allow the proponents of the historic preservation effort to see what they can actually come up with. They have ideas, but I don't see price tags attached to a lot of those ideas. And I think really that's what we need to think about, is not only the feasibility into the future, but what it's going to cost. I do like the idea that was brought forward by Councilor Wolbrook of putting it in front of the voters. I think that would be probably a good idea. So in general, I tend towards demolition of the entire property and getting on with life in Manitou. So I guess I'm going to be the Grinch tonight. It looks like we do have support building for continued do studies. I see Nancy, Judith, Julie, and John leaning towards, with some continuing effort into the future.
Yes, and can I jump in and just say, I'd like to see the numbers on what it would take to just preserve structure one if we are going to have a conversation about costs, and we don't have those numbers. So I'd like to see those.
Christine?
Mayor Graham, I just wanted to quick time check. It's 7 o'clock and
Right, Ryan turns into a pumpkin here. Do we have
he
any
does.
last questions? But do we have any last questions for Ryan? Julie?
Thank you. I don't know if this is for Ryan, but maybe it's for Ryan. So I'm assuming that URA money is available to help fund some of this or all of this, because it's a URA thing. So unless we decide to raid the rest of the URA money for our general fund, am I correct that those funds would be available to help support this?
No, this wouldn't qualify for URA money, no.
Why?
Denise, Denise,
This
you
is
want to
not in
address?
the URA district. So this is not in the URA district. So you can't,
Oh,
you'd have to
so they
ask.
can, but they would be able to allocate, since they gave us 1.4 million to use on anything we felt like it, I would assume they would give us money for this too. Is that right? That we're authorized to take that URA money? If we can put it in the general fund, I would imagine we could put it in Hiawatha too. Is that correct?
You are, as council, authorized to do that. You can take their funding and do that. So it is written in there.
Okay.
You do have that.
So when the mayor says that we're concerned we don't have, there may not be any money, this is just one potential source of money, it sounds like.
You could, yeah, council would have that authority to do such.
Okay.
Quick, are there any council or staff questions for Ryan before he disappears? I guess not. Ryan, I guess if we have follow-on questions, we'll send them to you in an email. Okay. We appreciate your help. Thank you.
Yeah,
Have
that
a nice
sounds
evening.
great. Just really quick, I will go ahead and price the demolition of structure 2, just so you have that. And after that, I'm here to help. Just, you guys know where to find me. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you. Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Well, council, what I might suggest then is there've been a number of things that were mentioned that we could, that we should probably look into, that you feel we should look into. My idea would be if we could enumerate those things and give those to staff and ask them to pursue those, that might be a reasonable course of action. For instance,
That's too vague for me. I'm not sure what
Well,
that means and I'm
well,
concerned.
okay, no, I understand. I was asking for specifics. Nancy, I think you have.
Yeah, couple things. One is that, again, a lot of work has already gone, 4 years worth of work has gone into this. There's 4 years worth of data, information, discussion, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of it is on the city's webpage. You can go back and research it. So Steve, I would certainly encourage you to do that because you, as the newest member, have the least information. But a lot of the concerns and questions that you're asking are in those documents because, again, a lot of questions have been asked and answered. Secondly, I would go back to my proposal that we pass a resolution directing staff to investigate and implement restoration of the historic aspects of Hiawatha Gardens. That we pass a resolution requesting that that the COG Railway $500,000 that's in our agreement with them, that we tap into that. We have to do that in agreement with them, that we have to tap into that to help with this project. Since regardless, it has to be transportation, some of it has to be transportation related because we bought this with PPRTA funds. There's also PPRTA dollars available for this. That we reappoint a group of staff and community members to facilitate and guide the funding and restoration process. And that they come back to us and that we hire a project manager with some of those funds that we currently do have available, that we put it into the historic district, and that group come back with a solid plan within 6 to 9 months that we can act on. But the main thing up front is that we decide that we are going to go forward with restoring at a minimum building number 1.
I support that. And I also would say if there's any council people that need to serve on this committee, I would volunteer my time for that. But I agree with everything that Mayor Pro Tem Fortune has put out.
Mayor Pro Tem, you had, I think, 5 things you listed there. I was jotting them down. If you've got them, to be the 4th item. What was that? It was after reappoint staff and community for a task force. You're muted. Nancy, you're muted. You're muted.
Darn. Put
Okay.
it in the historic district, hire a project manager to assist a group so that you've got someone who's working this, similar to what Laura did for us for that period of time, and then come back with a solid plan within 6 to 9 months that continuously asking and answering questions and with the plan to do it. So funding opportunities, what the use I think is proposed as a mobility hub and a community use of some sort. Just those 2 are all we need to know now. And another one that we might look at is figuring out ways that the building becomes self-sustaining, whether that's through public-private partnerships or whatever it might be, fees, I don't know, but a plan to help make it self-sustaining.
Look, in general, and I guess it's mostly Judith, you're supportive of that. Julie and John, it sounds like you're gravitating towards what Nancy's talking about here. Would it make sense to ask Nancy to make that a kind of a more formal document that we could review at a future meeting and go from there? Okay,
I would certainly be willing to work with staff on coming up with a resolution that could be presented at a future council meeting on this.
That's one possible course of action. Well, and obviously this isn't what I would be looking for, but it appears to be this is direction council's sort of taking. Would anyone have?
Mayor, could we just see a show of hands of the council members that are supportive of Mayor Pro Tem Fortune coming forth with a resolution, including everything that she stated?
Everyone in favor, raise their hand. Okay, so we have 4 in favor, and then all opposed, raise your hands. Okay, so I guess it was Councilor Bremner and myself. Susan, I think I didn't see you vote, so I guess you would abstain. Does that?
No, I think I'm just not on your gallery view because I voted with you and Councilman Bremner.
You're on the gallery view, but there's a little bit of lag there, so I wasn't sure. Okay, so we've got kind of a 4-3 position there. Well, I guess what I would suggest then is we let Mayor Pro Tem put something together for consideration at a future meeting. Denise?
So that future meeting will be November 3rd, that we can bring that resolution for vote. And in the interim, I recommend that we pull that group back together that's been working on this and start moving forward until we get that resolution completed on November 3rd. So that's the time that we can bring it back to council. And I believe Councilor Chandler and Mayor Pro Tem were the 2 that were represented on that at the initial. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I guess just one follow-on comment. There's talk about trying to make everything an integrated, having an integrated approach. There's certainly some temptation to do that, but it seems to me like we get an obstacle in front of us, and that precludes us from doing other work. I think this is going to affect our problems with our ability to address parking problems. So I do view this as that as being an obstacle. Anyway, okay, let's move on. Item number 2 tonight is consideration of the MAC. Oh, excuse me, Laura, I want to say thank you. My apologies. Thank you. And Christine, thank you. Did you have any follow-on comments you wanted to make?
Oh, they're off.
I guess not. I'm sorry. My apologies. Let's go ahead with the MAC board update. I believe we're going to have Neil Minch for that.
So we need Becca to stay on, Christine off, and then Neil back. Neil Mitch.
Yeah.
Hi, Neil.
Hey guys.
Okay.
I'm not sure who else from the board is on. Judy, are you able to see if there's anyone else on?
I'm kind of cruising through here. I'd have to, is there anyone in particular you were expecting to be?
Randy is on. It looks like Randy is on. Randy Hodges.
Okay, would you like him to?
Lori,
come as well?
Lori Wood is on.
Yeah, I'd like to, because the way we've operated is we kind of divided and conquered a bit. So when we talk about the conflict of interest and the eligibility, do we have Sarah Gallagher or Michael Howell on?
I don't see either of those two names.
Okay, but I can deal with that. But if Randy's important because of the conflict of interest piece.
Michael Howley is on. He's under
Oh, is
St.
he?
Michael.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
Looking alphabetically there.
Yeah, and that I think kind of covers us, because they're the individuals who worked on some of the subcomponents. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity just to give you an update here. You know, this is an awesome board that we have. Very energized, very enthusiastic, and I think we've had some very healthy dialogue with a immense amount of commitment. You know, we've been meeting twice a month since the board was formulated in late July. And we've been kind of focused on a base set of operating procedures, which frankly, we borrowed heavily from other boards. And then we began putting emphasis on some of the procedures that may be a bit more unique to our charter. And we're going to go over a couple of those this evening, because after our conversation with the finance director of Steamboat Springs, she urged us to make sure that we had the city council on board and actually approve some of these important, you know, components of our operating, you know, procedures. So the board, because there's a few of us on, but I think you're aware who they are. I wanted to kind of begin. We did include in the council packet all of the minutes and work session notes that we've had so far, and we kind of did that on purpose. It's a good inventory of where we've been and how we're trying to operate here. And I just wanted to see if anything had leapt out that you know required clarification. If not, we can just move on to the eligibility and conflict of interest you know, policies. Judy, are you going to be sharing the packet, or do I need
I can certainly do a share screen if you'd like me to.
Actually, if I can do that, then
you should be able to.
Okay, let me just adjust myself here. Share screen. I think this is it. Do you see the eligibility?
Yes.
Okay. What we are particularly interested in is what we're calling the competitive grants tier 2 eligibility, because obviously the tier 1 is defined. It's the Carnegie Building, Hiawatha Gardens, Manitou Arts Center, Miramont Castle, and the Manitou Springs Heritage Center. Those are defined. But we wanted to get your inputs on what we are recommending as the eligibility of the lower section here, which is the competitive grants process tier 2. This is the group that's eligible for 34% of the total sales tax proceeds from the match sales tax. So this has been approved by our board, and my objective here is to get this so you can approve this maybe in next week's council meeting, so we can formally adopt this and communicate it. I wasn't going to read it, but obviously we are saying it needs to benefit Manitou Springs. Were there any comments or questions on this?
Councilor Wolf? Neil, Councilor.
Did you call
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, you
Oh.
raised your hand, Julie.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, I'm trying to pull up the memo, but I don't know what page it's on. So I'll do my best to ask the question without the memo. But there was something on paragraph number 3 that I totally did not understand under conflicts of interest. I'm trying to find that.
We're not there yet.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah,
then I'll wait.
Thank you. Yeah, because
Okay.
we'll cover conflict of interest next.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we're good with the eligibility policy, as it were, for the competitive grants process.
Can anyone tell me what page it's on?
And real quick, that's on page 7 of the packet.
Thank you.
Yes.
What I might suggest is that we let Neil finish this presentation and then we could ask questions.
Okay.
Okay, Neil, go on, please.
So if I page down here, we're going to come to the conflict of interest, and I'm going to ask if Randy's on. If Randy, if you could just kind of comment, because you were one of the people who worked on this, just on the foundation for the language in this document.
Certainly. I went out and consulted different cities, neighboring cities. I looked at their ordinances to see what kind of conflict of interest statements they had. I looked at, let's see, I looked at Salida. I looked at Colorado Springs, Denver. I looked at, I think Steamboat Springs. I looked at, let's see, there was a couple other smaller ones that slipped my mind right now. But this is a bit of a distillation of all the different conflict of interest policies that are written into ordinances in neighboring communities around the area.
So again, I don't think we were planning on reading this to you, but as a board, we felt this was a pretty important policy, which we wanted to get approved quickly, so that the community understood the way we were approaching this and the way we were trying to represent all of our interests. So this could be a good time to take any questions here. I know Judy had one.
Can I ask my question now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just had one question on the competitive grants process, tier 2. Organizations or fiscal sponsoring organizations need to have been in existence for at least 2 years. What was the motivation for making it 2 years and not 1 year? Is that kind of the standard in this situation? I'm just curious.
I forget. Yeah, Michael, did you want to answer that? Michael Howell?
Yes, initially it was 3 years. That seemed to be one of the common norms, was 3 years. Sarah and I discussed the nature of Manitou at length and decided to drop it down to 2 years.
Thank you.
Okay, I've moved back to the conflict of interest. So, Councilman Wolf.
Thank you. The first sentence of number 3 is not a sentence. It's a bunch of words, but it's not a complete sentence, and I have no idea what you meant to say, but it's not a proper sentence. So if you're going to submit this to somebody, I think it needs to be reworked. That's all. And that, I mean, if you read it, it doesn't mean anything.
What does it say, Nancy? What, Julie?
It says no match committee member may perform an official act affecting to TO its economic benefit, 1 of the 5 match entities, the Carnegie Building, Manitou Arts Center, Manitou Springs Heritage Center, Miramont Castle, the Hiawatha Gardens property, close paren, nor any other nonprofit entity who may qualify, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't make sense. Anyone who may perform an official act affecting to TO, its economic, I mean, I think what you're trying to say, I'm going to guess, is that if there's a match committee member who has a conflict with a particular entity that's vying for money, then that committee member must recuse. That's just my guess, but the sentence itself is not a sentence. That's all. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a correct sentence. I mean, I don't know what you thought it meant. Did I guess right what you thought it meant when I said, you know, you can't participate in the vote if you have a conflict?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I would just suggest you rewrite that because that's not a correct sentence. That's all. It doesn't say that.
The last sentence of paragraph 3 kind of sums up what we were trying to say.
Well, maybe you just want to eliminate the first sentence and then take out the word likewise and you might be okay.
Yeah, we can.
You can work on it. I just wanted you to know that was funky, you know.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense.
Neil, why don't you go ahead with your presentation, Neil?
Yeah. So I think we can fix the wording on that and make that available, because this is another document that we do want to get approved officially in a formal city council meeting. Were there any comments? Because we are going to be asking each board member, including alternates, because the alternates may have to substitute for a regular board member a conflict of interest statement. You know, this is obviously, you know, pretty simple here. So in my case, I would obviously list the Manitou Springs Heritage Center because I am an active board member there. Both of these kind of pages go hand in hand. And that's ultimately what we're going to want to have approved pretty quickly here because we are getting to a point where questions are beginning to be asked. Okay?
Oh, I have another comment before we go, if I can
Yeah,
have another turn.
please.
Number 4 isn't a sentence either. I mean, should it read, the first sentence of number 4 is not a sentence. It's, I don't know what you even mean to say, but it's, I mean, don't you agree? Should it remain unclear whether the member has a conflict of interest, a vote of the body may be taken on the whether a conflict exists. Oh, maybe if you take out the word the, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I finally figured out what you're trying to say. I would just clean this up because you don't want to submit something that's, you know,
No, you're
unclear
right.
or written poorly, you know.
If you add a comma after interest, you could add a comment after interest, and that might help too. Although I think really, if we can get the highlights of the presentation, Neil, go ahead, please.
Okay, so that was it in terms of the kind of formal piece. There were a couple of areas that we just wanted to make sure we were aligned on as we move forward here. You know, one of these is particularly with regards the Carnegie Building and Hiawatha Gardens. You know, our assumption is that because both of these are city-owned, you know, properties, that there would be a city resource that would be ultimately submitting the application, even though they may be working with a larger group of people. And we just need to make sure we know who, in the case of the Carnegie Building and Hiawatha Gardens, that person or group is going to be.
Let's let Neil finish his presentation before we ask questions.
Okay.
That's a question.
Yeah, that's a question I want answered during.
Wants us to answer the question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Neil.
The second area is we've had different views on this, is whether any of the 5 entities that comprise the Tier 1 group, that's the Carnegie, Hiawatha, the MAC, Miramont Heritage Center, whether they can also apply for a competitive grant.
I couldn't hear you, Neil. Can you say that again?
Okay.
That last sentence?
Whether they can also apply for one of the competitive grants that's in the 34%. We had some mixed views on that. And I won't go into what those were, but that's one of the areas we'd like to hear council's direction on. And I think the third one is we're kind of assuming that because this is independent of the budget, effectively, because it's a specific sales tax, that when the fiscal 21 budget is approved, I think that's done by early December, we're not really expecting any specific direction from City Council with regards the allocation of funds, of match funds for 2021. We're kind of assuming that we already have the information we need, of course, with everyone's applications. And I just want to confirm that that is the case. The next steps is, you know, mid to late October, we will be ready to bring in the applications that we are using. The applications are based on the Colorado Common Grant application. we have a simplified one for the competitive grants. And I think we're going to be requiring the full Colorado Common Grant application for the tier ones. But again, we just want to make sure that you're on board with the application that we are using. I'm not sure we'll have it at the same time, but shortly thereafter, we will have the rating matrix. This is how we're going to rate the applications, which will ultimately determine the grants that we recommend for each application. That may get into November. I'm not sure we're going to have that when we are reviewing the application. So there's probably an October work session and a November work session focused on application and rating. In terms of help needed, we're at a point now where we need to communicate to the community where we are and outline some expectations. I actually drafted a rough memo that we will review in our board meeting next week. And I'd like that to be communicated out through the normal city communication processes. And that memo is going to talk about where we've been, where we are, timeline, when can people begin to submit applications, when does the applications close, and probably most importantly, when can organizations expect money? And our current thinking on this is open applications on December 1, close applications on January 31, and set the expectation that checks will be issued in early April. It might be earlier, but we want to set a conservative expectation just in case we run into some challenges on the on getting alignment on the recommendation for grant awards. That's kind of where we are. I think this would be good now to kind of go back to each section and make sure that we answer questions and we get our questions answered perhaps. So I think on the eligibility and conflict of interest, were there any other comments there? Randy?
Oh, I have a comment.
Yes.
Julie?
What are you talking about when you say application?
Everyone who is requesting match monies has to submit an application.
Oh, those applications. Okay. And so were you saying that one of the questions of your board was whether the monies that are designated for art-related nonprofits could be used toward building costs?
No.
Did I understand that right?
No,
Oh.
not at all.
Can you elaborate on that question you asked where you wanted to know if you can borrow, you can take money from both pots, basically?
Right. So as the ordinance states, 66% of the match monies are for operational or for capital building for the Carnegie Building, Hiawatha Gardens, the MAC, Miramont, and the Heritage Center. That's 66% of the total match sales tax proceeds goes to those 5 entities. The question,
well, not necessarily to all of them, but to any of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the balance of 34% goes into a competitive grants process, which is for arts, culture, and history projects, events in Manitou Springs. So the question is, can any of those 5 Tier 1 organizations apply for a competitive grant as well?
I see. Okay, thank you for explaining that.
So I'll give you an example perhaps. So the Heritage Center partners with a theater company to put on ghost tours. And, you know, the theater company could use us as a fiscal agent and apply for a grant, but ultimately it's benefiting the Heritage Center. So that would be a kind of an example where that kind of clarity is needed. Okay.
And I don't remember what your other 2 questions were. Can you tell us what they were?
Absolutely. The names of the city resource that will provide the applications for the Carnegie Building and Hiawatha Gardens.
Oh yeah, I didn't understand that question either, Neil.
Okay.
You need the name of a city resource? What's a city? I don't know what you're
person.
talking about. I'm sorry.
A person, you know, an application needs an author. Someone needs to submit an application.
So
someone
for the city someone has to represent the city in applying for the money that's going to go to the Carnegie Building and or to the Hiawatha Gardens. So
exactly.
My thought would be that the city administrator would normally be our point of contact for that kind of interaction, or she could delegate someone. That would be the quick thought. I think that's just, we just want to identify that because those 2 properties are city owned. Okay.
What was your 3rd question, Neil?
It isn't a question in as much as it's a statement or assumption, which is when the fiscal 21 budget is approved, and I think that happens by like December 1, our assumption at this point is there won't be any direction to the match board on how we should be allocating the match monies that we will be receiving for the second half of this year. In other words, they are 2 discrete activities.
Okay, well, I don't know if anybody else understands that. I have to confess, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll stop now and give other people a
Well, I'll give you an example. If in the budget, there's $5 million to restore Hiawatha Gardens, are you making an assumption that some of that is coming from match?
Oh.
Okay.
Or that all of it's coming from match would be my assumption. But okay, thank you for clarifying your question. I'll stop now.
Mayor Pro Tem, you have a question?
No, I was just going to try to answer or propose an answer for that question, and that is that it's important that we keep the politics out of the match distribution process. So I would say it's a fairly safe assumption, even though we're in the first year and we don't know 100% anything, that we will not provide direction to the match board after the FY21 budget is approved on December 1st. So I would say that the assumption that Neil just said is the ideal and that we would like to follow that.
Neil, may I make a recommendation that you unshare your screen so that the
Yes,
mayor,
of course.
everybody?
Thank you. I should have done that.
Okay, we're good. Okay, so really we've got 3 questions here. We've had a little bit of discussion on those. I'm wondering if it wouldn't make sense to go back and go through 1, 2, 3, and then we kind of take the temperature from council and see how we feel. I think we could probably get through this fairly quickly.
Yes.
If there's no objection, Neil, for the sake of clarity, if you would begin with question 1 again. And I think we have a recommended course of action. So if you could state that or explain it, that would be
Right.
good.
So question 1 is who will submit the applications for the Carnegie Building and Hiawatha Gardens? And the answer I have at this point is the city administrator or her designate.
Just quick show of hands. All council members in favor of that, raise your hands.
Great.
Okay, looks like, okay, that passed. Okay, so you've got direction on that one, Neil. Question number 2.
Second one is, and Councilwoman Wolf actually summed it up, is do we allow double dipping? Because that is the scenario I described would be what I would call double dipping. So can one of the 5 tier 1 organizations apply for a tier 2 competitive grant?
Can I make a comment about that?
Go ahead, Councilor Wolf.
Thank you. I don't think that we can legally change the legislation at this point. And so I would imagine the answer is that if they can apply, they can apply. Because if the law says they can apply, which it doesn't tell them they can't, then they can. And then you will have to use your own discretion to determine whether you want to award them one or both or none of the money. But I don't think that we as a group can narrow the scope of the legislation. It is what it is. In other words, I don't think it matters how we vote. I think legally they already have the right to apply. They can apply as long as it's been in business for 2 years and blah, 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 blah. We can't change the law because we're voting.
That's
I think
actually
really. Go ahead, Neil.
No. I think a couple of our board members thought similarly, though perhaps not with the same clarity there. So thank you.
Just my opinion. I'm not the city attorney, but it makes sense to me. I can't imagine how a city council is allowed to reduce applicants from what the law says can be the applicant pool. So that's just my opinion, but don't, feel free to double check with Jeff Parker if you want.
Well, I think it's appropriate that we set some basic ground rules and guidelines and that we're all on board with that. So I think that's a relevant question. I guess personally, I would discourage that, but there's going to be a lot of fuzzy areas. I think as we go through this first year, there's going to be some trial and error. Mayor Pro Tem? You're muted.
Unmute.
Good thing you can't hear me swear when I'm muted. I would agree with Julie. I think at this point in time, just allowing anyone that wants to apply within the general criteria be allowed to apply, but in the grading criteria, as you're assessing the grants, you can address it more in that regard. I hesitate at this point to put too many constraints on it. So
yep, no, that's good. And for the record, I think, and Randy, correct me here, I think a reasonable number of our board was in favor of letting them apply. I think I was one of the ones in the minority who thought we shouldn't. So this has been a great conversation, and I'm very comfortable with the direction that's been offered by Nancy and Julie.
So council, let's have a show of hands. If you're gravitating towards what Nancy and Julie have called for, raise your hands in favor. Okay, take that as direction, Neil, if you would please. And then I think we have one more question.
No.
Can't hear you, Neil.
We've already talked about the budget, so we are 3 for 3.
Okay, we're good. 3 for 3. Okay, Denise?
I just want to say, Neil, please reach out to Alex and he can help with the communication. So
Yeah,
just reach out to Alex and he'll manage that. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Neil, I believe we've answered your questions.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. Did you have anything else for us?
I didn't. I'm going to ask kind of Randy because he's on. Was there anything I've left out, Randy, that you can think of?
I don't think so. Not at this point in time. Not at this
Okay.
point.
Council, do we have any other questions or comments for Neil, Randy, or the match people? Councilor Wolf?
Oh, I just want to say you guys have done so much work, and thank you so much.
No problem.
Yes,
Great
thank
board.
you. Kudos. Phenomenal job.
Mayor Pro Tem, you had a comment?
I just wanted to reiterate that this is, we handed them a super hard challenge, and they have absolutely risen to that challenge and are doing really, really good work. So thanks.
Okay. Yes, thanks to you and Neil, Randy, and St. Michael and Lori, if you're out there, pass our appreciation on to your co-workers.
And if I could, you know, there's some people on our board. I think it's the first time they've been on a city board, and boy, they bring some great experience. I mean, we'd be lost without them. So it's really good having fresh blood.
Great, good.
All right, guys.
Great,
Enjoy
thank you.
everything.
Okay, you too. Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.
Mayor, would you entertain a break at this time? Would that be appropriate?
Yes, I would suggest that. It's 7:47. How about we reconvene at 8 o'clock? Would that be good?
Thank you.
Give us 13 minutes. Okay, see you all at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
And build resiliency across all of our different master plan elements, for instance, infrastructure, economy, and housing. Our planning director oversees updates and implementation for our hazard mitigation plan. In our plan, we have a list of 10 priority actions, and we've completed 9 of those. And some of these actions lay important groundwork for upcoming efforts. Actions currently underway include our public works renovation, where we'll be able to move our emergency command out of city facilities that are in the floodplain. That's a priority action. Planning Department is participating in the El Paso County Discovery Project to update floodplain mapping for some key flood corridors. In terms of planning our upcoming actions, we know that our hazard risks remain high, and we're particularly concerned about our wildfire risk because of the extent of risk across our community. And so at present, what we're suggesting is to reconvene our Hazard Mitigation Plan Steering Committee. And that's the group we originally formed to help develop our strategy. And this is mainly our department heads from key departments. We want to get their input, help really, I would say, help prioritize actions, further evaluate what we've accomplished, identify current capacity. And we know that there are currently significant grant opportunities out there, but we need the capacity to really manage, go after these grants and manage the projects. And so our planning director shared that she and our fire chief think it really makes sense for this group to meet, and then they will report back to council with a more comprehensive update sometime this fall. And then I'd just like to share that FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, really likes the way that we did our plan. They like our holistic approach and the way that we've integrated it with our community master plan. And I've been contacted by several different people who are doing more research about how this type of approach could be replicated for other communities. So that's really exciting. And I definitely encourage you to go to the Plan Manitou website and check out the plan. It's very readable. Next slide. So in conclusion, we have a year to move forward and wrap up our current short-term implementation actions that we have planned and look at what we haven't gotten to and determine how we will address those. So I think we're looking at extending implementation for another year. And then at that point, we'll consider next steps. Those could be some amendments to the plan, considering staff capacity that we have at that point. And we'll certainly check in with Planning Commission and with Council to share some ideas for moving forward. And so this evening, we would really like to hear your comments and questions about the plan, and if you have any input on the priorities that we've identified.
I can't hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute. My bad. Okay, Councilor Chandler, you have the floor.
I think you've just done a phenomenal job. I just wanted to say one thing about the food survey. I think it's a wonderful that one of the first steps we've taken is to have Karen Share do a monthly food distribution. I would like to see the food assessment strategies really expand from that. While I appreciate food distribution, the food that's distributed isn't always healthy, it often comes packaged in a lot of plastic and so forth. I would like to see this community really get behind more community gardens, the community orchard that we're trying to plant at Flying Pig Farm, and really think outside the box to what we can do in the future, given climate change, to help support locally grown and distributed food. I think, but otherwise, I just think that it's really amazing, and kudos to you and the planning department and Public Works.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wolf? Councilor Wolf?
Thank you. Hi, Karen. Just a couple things. What's the difference between planned for 2020 and ongoing? You know, on that screen, the implementation overview.
Sure. Yeah, so the difference is that there's some actions that are kind of discrete that we might start them and stop them and actually end them. And so let's see, an example of that, for instance, would be the Creek Walk Trail project that eventually we'll complete that. An ongoing action would be something like bridge maintenance inspections, which is something that we've identified as important for a hazard risk. We do that, but you know, it has to be done continually. So we kind of want to still keep it in the plan so that we can check in on those things as needed, just to make sure that they are ongoing. Does that make sense?
What's the difference between underway and ongoing?
Good question.
Don't they both mean the same thing? Can you help me with that?
I mean, again, I guess underway is something that we just started, that we think, you know, we'll wrap up. If it's something that needs to happen continuously, like if we decide, okay, we need to keep updating this plan, we'll add it to ongoing.
What's the difference between underway and planned for 2020?
Well, I was just trying to show that underway actions have already started. planned for 2020 means they haven't started yet, but they're planned to.
Oh,
Which, yeah, I mean, it's a minor distinction.
okay. So plan for 2020 means you plan to get it done this year, but you haven't started yet.
Right.
And then underway means we didn't start it yet also.
Well, underway means we have started it.
Okay, sure. And would it reduce the fire risk? Because I know this is your specialty area with hazard mitigation. Would it reduce the fire risk to the city if we cut back or removed all the dead trees that line Manitou Avenue there on the north side of the street, like on the east end of town? You know, it just looks kind of trashy to see so many dead trees, even though some of them have been cleared recently, it looks like. But is that, maybe that's not such a fire risk? Or that just seems so, as someone who's not experienced or educated about fire risk, just driving down the road, it looks like, oh my gosh, tinderbox. But because that seems like it'd be pretty easy to, you know, just cut down some trees as opposed to something complicated with some big federal grant. What do you think about that?
Well, in terms of fire risk, our fire department is certainly aware of vegetation that's close to buildings, even within our downtown area. That poses less of a hazard risk, for instance, than if it's up on the hillsides. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I think it would depend on, you know, the particular situation. And again, you know, about evaluating tree health and really, I guess, the long-term plan for that streetscape.
So all the residential properties that are just along the, sort of behind the north end of the street there, behind all the trees, those would be the properties, I assume, that would be most apt to catch fire?
I mean, if they were in close proximity to those trees, certainly, yeah. I mean, probably that would be something that our Public Works Department would need to evaluate.
Mention also that the firemen did a pretty extensive set of guidelines in dealing with wildfire and so forth. That might be worth looking into. I think Lieutenant Bobby White was the author of that. He's quite knowledgeable about how to do the assessment and make recommendations to homeowners and property owners. So that might be a resource also that would be germane to this discussion.
Is that private property, John? I don't even know.
Well, I think that the study the firemen did, it covers all of Manitou, so it's public and private property. They kind of
I mean, the property, all the trees along the north end of Manitou Ave, like between Memorial Park and, I don't know, the pool or something. Is that all private property?
I believe it is.
Is that right, Karen? Is that why we maybe haven't done anything about all those dead trees? Because it's not ours?
I mean, that could certainly be one aspect of it.
Like all along the Briarhurst and stuff.
I think we're getting a little beyond the scope of, you know, the presentation tonight, but maybe we could look into that. Karen, maybe you could research that and provide just a written explanation to us. That would be helpful.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions, comments for Karen? Susan, please.
Thank you, Karen, for the presentation. And I want to piggyback on Councilwoman Chandler's comments about gardening and community gardening, but a lot of people did front yard or flower bed gardening this year, and the topic of composting keeps coming up.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's hard in Colorado because of our temperatures aren't really conducive, but I think there's a demand. Our soil's not very rich, and it needs to be augmented. That can be expensive. But also people have things they'd like to compost and then have the ability to pick up that compost to augment their gardens. And I don't know if there's any thought that's been given to having some location for that, some public works maybe involvement to provide a secure location. I know that we do a few things, like we do the chipping twice a year, which is great. I use that often, but I think this is a small thing. I know it's not easy, but it would certainly seem to fit into your food security plan and also the climate aspect of Plan Manitou. And I just don't know if there's been any synergy between like Public Works or the Garden Club or how we would do that, but I've had a lot of requests for that and a lot of really great interest in people doing just starting gardening. This year's been amazing. It's one of the positive things about COVID, if there are already positive things. But it really has in my neighborhood really taken off. But people are just really looking to compost, and it seems like something that a community of this size could maybe figure out how to do that securely. I mean, when I say securely, I'm talking about bears and vandals, because you don't want people to crash in your compost pile, and you don't want bears going through it. But anyway, something that I'd really think could be beneficial and maybe fit under your food security part, because it just is one of those things. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that input. And a couple years ago, or maybe more than that, I did work on a project with Jeremy Tackett, who was a local farmer. And so we do have some background on that. Maybe like a smaller scale facility to start might be an option. And from my Public Works vantage point now, I kind of have a different perspective on things and learning some more things. So that might tie into that well. We have just so many great community advocates for food that I could see a lot happening.
Great. Are there comments from anyone who hasn't spoken yet on this topic? Mr. Shada, Mr. Bremner? Nothing? Okay. I think we need to get this wrapped up here pretty quick. Julie, maybe one last question.
I just wanted to say I love Susan's idea. I think that's fabulous. I think that was great. I love that idea. I just want to say that.
Well, thank you, Julie. I think, Becky Elder gets a lot of credit for trying to push this forward when she was on council. So, and I had not really thought about it often, but this year with my neighbors really getting involved in, gardening, it really came up again. And I know that I think Jeremy moved, and that was one of the reasons it didn't get off the ground. But perhaps if he left you with enough information, and I agree that your involvement in Public Works is probably would probably help, facilitate that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Chandler?
I'm just going to say one thing about that. The Climate Action Work Group actually is looking into, because there's always a company to provide something for you. There's some companies that actually will pick up a city's compost it for you, and bring back the compost. But of course, there's a fee involved, and we've been looking into that. And there is a composting center close by in Colorado Springs. So that's another thing that I'll continue to look into and bring back to council at another date.
Great, thank you. Okay, Denise.
And I want to recognize Karen for the Plan Manitou, and she leads the department heads. We meet quarterly. She leads that meeting and get updates where everybody's at and organizing it. So she's doing a great job with keeping us all on task as we move forward with Plan Manitou.
Yeah, really great job. Awesome.
Great. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Working for your presentation tonight. Well, thanks, and you have a nice evening, Karen.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Great. And with that, we'll move on to the last discussion topic for this evening. And that's an update on the administrative abatement of the house at 121 Pawnee. Denise, are you?
No, Melissa Warden and probably Becca both need to come over just from the finances. I think it's pretty self-explanatory about how we're moving forward with this. We got an estimate or a price for it. It just depends whether there's going to be any asbestos or not. So Melissa, you can go ahead and just briefly talk about it compared to the memo.
Okay, I'll just go through, I'll make this pretty quick because it's pretty simple. On the 15th, our last council meeting, we were asked to move forward with the abatement of 121 Pawnee. On the 16th, Jeff Parker drew up a notice of abatement and it was served to the homeowner that evening. Based off of our conversations, she seemed pretty eager to get the house demolished as well. So Jeff Parker went back and did a permission to demolish, and she was served that along with Pikes Peak Regional Buildings notice to vacate on the 18th. During this, Jeff Jones proceeded in getting the bids that kind of fit our timeline. Terra Builders is who we came back with, which is $39,500. And Becca's going to talk about that, the financial part of that. But that bid does include asbestos testing, the permitting, demolition, and making that lot a flat grade, empty lot again. It also includes tree trimming and removal.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Grading, we don't have to grade it. I mean, isn't that unnecessary? Is the grading of the property itself dangerous? Why would we be grading it?
So essentially what it means is it's basically taking that down to a flat lot, taking all the footers, the basement, the crawl space, any of that would be left. It's taking all of that out, so it's no longer a danger. There's no giant holes, trip hazards, anything like that. It's just a flat lot.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And Becca, did you have additional information?
Not really. It's just that since it's currently not in the budget, we will be adding it to the final amended 2020 budget.
Okay.
And it might be a bit more than this 39.5 due to the fact that we don't know about asbestos. So the final cost might be more than that. But we will be putting a lien on the property at El Paso County. So we will eventually be reimbursed.
8% interest.
Oh.
Do we have any additional questions for Melissa or Becca? Councilor Chandler?
I just want a clarification on the contract itself. Under number 1, it says mobilization, inspections, and permits, $2,000. And then under notes, number 2, under notes, it says the above prices do not include permits. If required, additional fees will be incurred. So I just wanted to know, are permits included or not in this contract?
Jeff is not online, so I can't answer that because Jeff is managing this contract. So we can get back with you. We can send it via email to all of council.
Because the number 1 isn't broken out, but then under notes, you know, if it's not including permits, I just would like a clarification on that. Thanks.
Okay, you bet.
Thank you.
Melissa, Becca, thank you very much. We appreciate the updates. You have a nice evening now. Okay. And with that, we've completed all our discussion items. We can go on to council correspondence. Would anyone like to start off? I don't see any volunteers. Well, actually we do. Mayor Pro Tem.
Just quickly, lots of comments on the proposed removal of trees on the Beckers Lane Bridge project. I was able to finally get into the virtual meeting that they had last week on it. It was a very good meeting, but a lot of people were not able to get into it. So they're going to have another meeting to discuss what that's looking like and whatever concerns there are. So there's that. And then the second is in Crystal, in my ward, GFL failed to pick up last week. So some of you may know I've been posting a lot on Nextdoor about that because I had a lot of, and they sent out an email to some people anyway and said, leave your trash out overnight, which is in direct violation of our ordinance and in bear season of all times to leave your trash out overnight. So anyway, so that I know that staff is working on that, but that was hugely problematic. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wolf?
This is a question more than a comment, because the emails I'm referring to that I've reviewed about concern with the trees were sent to all of us, not just to me. But so what's the deal? I mean, do we have an opportunity to, are we able to put a hold on the project, or at least the part of the project impacting the trees, until we can have some discussion and community input about that? Because it seems like people feel very strongly about it.
I know there is another community, or the contractor's coming back in again to discuss it with the people who are not able to attend, and I think that's gone out. I don't know if Denise or Roy can address it any more than that. And it is a URA project as well. Unfortunately, Karen's off now because Karen's helping to manage that project, but it's a URA project as well.
If it's just a matter of talking to the contractor's already said it is what it is, so shut up. So that's, talking to the contractor is not of any interest to me in that respect. I'm just wondering if the city itself, we as Manitou City, do we have the legal right to put a hold on this whole thing until we can find out what we're going to do, if anything? Because the contractor is, I'm not referring, the contractor is going to go forward with the contract unless we tell him, no, you can't. So I'm referring to whether anyone in Manitou is interested in putting this project on hold, or at least scheduling some kind of, getting this on the agenda for next week or something, so that we can address the issue. I mean, our own mayor, was very actively involved in protesting after the city council made a previous final decision about the other bridge. And we were, so much community input that the situation was improved ultimately, and we didn't have to have that bridge destroyed. So I'm just wondering if we as a city, shouldn't we do something to allow public input before we go forward? And I don't mean find out how the contractor feels.
No, but
my sense was that the community, this was the design that was being presented, and the contractor was looking for community input on it.
Oh, so you mean the design isn't finalized, Nancy?
I can't answer that at this point in time. Again, Karen, it's unfortunate Karen's not still on because she could answer. She's managing the project for the city.
The intent is to have, the plan is to have another meeting, one that people can attend. I mean, that was part of the frustration, was they couldn't log in and participate in the meeting. They may have been frustrated beyond that, even if they'd been able to get into the meeting, but at least it seems to me like the next step is to give them a chance to express their concerns to the contractor, and then we move on from there.
So I guess, John, that assumes that the contractor won't do anything to those trees until they get the okay from Manitou. I think somebody from our city needs to instruct the contractor that you're on hold until we get this issue resolved. And if the city doesn't inform the contractor of that, I think our citizens are going to be upset with us for just sitting back and waiting for them to have their little meetings. I guess if I knew more about the timeline, maybe my concern is irrelevant. If they don't plan on touching those trees for another 90 days, then it's not necessary for the city to put things on hold at this stage. But if they're planning on destroying those trees in 2 weeks, then having a city meeting about it won't really be helpful if the trees are already gone.
Denise, would it be possible for you to check the timeline and see how close we are? If we need to get an immediate stay of execution, that's one thing, but if we can kind of walk through the process and not have to reschedule things, that would probably be helpful too. That'd be
Yeah,
simple.
Roy and I will follow up on that. I'm looking and I don't have an update here of the timeline, but I will, Roy and I will follow up and we'll send out an email.
Does that sound reasonable, Julie?
Will the email tell the contractor to do not destroy those trees until you hear from us? That's, I guess, what I'm asking, what I'm suggesting we do, is to tell them, leave those trees alone until you have a definite answer from us. Is there consensus among council on this? I know Nancy is not in favor because I've been reading the emails, but I'm just concerned about people feeling discounted. Getting an email isn't going to be the answer.
yeah.
If the email says they're going to tear the trees down on Sunday, it won't help us.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I don't know if there's other contingencies that we need to be concerned about too. I don't know if the contractor needs to get something done before they think the cold weather is going to hit. I mean, it's probably going to be nice
Right.
for a while, but that's a factor.
Well, that's a good point. That's a really good point, John. And then also, the contract will either say that the contract will either say that the contractor will do whatever he damn feels like doing after he has his little public meeting, or it'll say that Manitou has the right to give input to make the final decision. I guess nobody knows what the contract says. Is that right, Denise? Do we know?
Yeah, I don't know where they are in the process and what their start date is. I don't have that on my project update.
No, I don't want to know their start date. I want to know if the contract allows Manitou to make the final decision.
Well, Manitou can, I believe, in that contract at any point. The URA is managing it. So I guess I would ask direction from all of council of how do you want us to proceed? I can provide an email tomorrow with an update of where we are and what it is. I cannot imagine that they're going to cut trees down tomorrow. I think the public meeting, do we know? I don't have the date of when the next public meeting is. Roy, do you know when it is by chance? I think it's next week, if I remember correctly. So we have a little bit of time, but I'm looking to see if I have it in here from Karen of when the change. Do you know, Judy, Councilor Chandler, when the next public meeting is?
I don't know. That was actually going to be one of my questions with my comments on the trees as well. So I do not know the answer to that.
In that case, I'd like to propose that we as a group request that Denise advise the contractor that you are not allowed to cut those trees down until you hear from us. And then I guess the other part of it too is hopefully the mayor's willing to put it on the agenda in the future so we can let the contractor know what our decision is.
Discuss that. And, yeah, it's. Not knowing when that meeting's going to be, I guess we could get it on next week's agenda. That shouldn't be.
Yeah, as long as the contractor knows that do not cut those trees down until you hear from us. That's all I'm asking.
And Mayor, we can still put an agenda item on for next week. So it's on time.
We've got till noon tomorrow, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Denise, would it be possible that you could send the contractor an email in the morning, and if they've got any heartburn with that, you could get back to us, tell all of council if there's some reason, I can't imagine what it would be at the moment, but if they say they need to move forward before, say, our next meeting, you could let us know as a body.
I'll give you an update tomorrow as soon as I can get it. I'm sending an email right now to try to get the update, and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and
Just
I
from
would
the-
suggest that we have an emergency meeting if they're going to do this before next Tuesday.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement then. All right. Do we have other council correspondence? Let's see, I think Councilor Shada and then Councilor Chandler.
Yes. Dee, maybe you can answer this. With regard to the GFL and our residents and whatnot, who essentially didn't get the trash picked up and stuff like that, I understand we have, in our contract, there are fines and whatnot for this. Is there any way we can reimburse these residents for the fact that they didn't get their trash picked up?
John, was that directed to Denise? I had a hard time.
Yeah, I was just wondering the structure, Denise, in terms of how that happens. Don't we have fines for them?
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do. We're working on that to invoice for the last one to identify exactly how many were not picked up. So we're working on that, you know.
What I'm interested is can we get our residents reimbursed for the fact that they didn't service?
Yeah, I mean, we can look at that and see what that will take. I can't imagine that we can't. Let me just do some research on it and see what that will take, and I can let all of you know. They were serviced. They were just serviced the next day, unfortunately. But yes, they. But let me do some research.
Well, anyway, it was just a thought. And then the other thing too is I did review that Beckers Street and Beckers Bridge meeting. It seems like another really big issue was the lighting. And I think people were really concerned that the lighting plan that was going to come from essentially Manitou Avenue was just going to penetrate deep into that residential neighborhood. And it seemed like to me, in listening to the response by, you know, the people who were running the meeting, their comments were things like, well, you know, the lighting company has awards, but it didn't answer the residents' questions about could that lighting be limited so that the lighting plan for the new bridge and the street improvements would be highly restricted only to the street and the bridge itself, not broadcasting clear in the dark and in the residents.
Mr. Shade, I could barely understand you. You were breaking in and out, but I think you're talking about the lighting that was addressed at the bridge. And I know, so we'll talk about it because I know the last meeting, as you know, it was not a Zoom meeting. This next meeting is going to be a Zoom meeting so there can be conversation back and forth. And we've asked them, I believe we did ask them to enhance their lighting information that they have and what it's going to be because they weren't able to answer some of the questions that were addressed.
Okay. Well, I guess, and I'm sorry if for some reason you can't hear me, my microphone is having a problem. It seems like to me all these lighting plans we get this standard kind of lighting fixture from the city of Colorado Springs that just broadcasts light every direction. Okay.
Going down.
That seems like it seems like that's our only option, our only pick. And it seemed like there were lots of comments that wasn't acceptable to people.
Right, they want the lighting to go down so it doesn't go out and keep it from going up. So, okay.
Right, thank you.
Chandler, did you have anything?
I have a few things. I'd like to make my comment about the trees. I just want to really thank the citizens of Manitou for taking the time to contact council about the trees on Beckers Lane. I can't thank you enough for being so passionate about it. I want to specifically call out Melody Doherty, Becky Elder, and those really involved in the saving of our trees. Couple comments. When I was a very new council member in February, I met over at Beckers Lane with a couple people from Public Works and was informed, I asked them this question, are trees going to come down? And they said, no trees are going to come down in this project. Later, I met with someone from the URA and I was informed that trees were going to come down. And then of course, COVID hit. I hope that when the contractor or whoever, we look at these trees, that we have a tree specialist go over there, an arborist or someone who's a tree specialist. Some of those trees have been so heavily cut back from for the utility lines that a few of them may not be salvageable, but most of them look like they are. But I would certainly want a tree specialist involved in that. I also want to say that I think it's a little disingenuous when so many of us work so hard for Manitou Springs to be designated as a Tree City USA. And then there are people who say, well, these trees are going to go out, but 4-foot trees, new 4-foot trees that are going to take 25 to 30 years to mature will be put in their place. So I just want people who know what they're talking about trees, because those little baby trees, I don't care how big they are, do not equal the canopy and the shade provided by those trees. So that said, I appreciate the community caring as much about the trees as they do about preserving the historic parts of Hiawatha Gardens. I also met with OSAC yesterday. I was on OSAC Zoom meeting. Just another shout out to this amazing group who work to maintain our trails and maintain the signage and work to look at purchasing other parcels of open space and look at connecting our trail system. So always a shout out to OSAC. The Beehive is progressing. We meet at least weekly, sometimes more. Aspen Point did start on the 22nd. Things are going well. Tessa will be coming on board 1 day a week, probably Wednesday or Friday in the near future. And we have restorative justice in place on an as-needed basis. So that kind of completes phase 1, mainly to support the police and fire department. And then we'll be moving into phase 2 early next year. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bremner, do you have anything?
No, I don't. My wife ran 100 miles last weekend in Utah. She had a really good race and did really well.
Good. Well, we extend our congratulations to her.
Thanks.
Okay. All right.
And she beat his time.
Oh, really?
That's right. I ran the same course in 2011 and she beat my time. So.
Councilor Wilbert?
I don't have anything. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, great. Just briefly, I did have a conversation with one of the executives from GFL, the regional vice president. He'd also talked to Denise previously, and he did indicate that they want to provide a better degree of service. We talked about some of the concerns that we have about animals, the urban, the people wild animal interface, and so I think he learned a few things out of that. So hopefully we'll see improved service. I did get a call from a lady last week who was complaining about service, and I called her this afternoon, and she said they got her trash early this morning, so, or at least before noon. So she was felt there was an improvement there. That's pretty much all I've got. No, I guess I should mention about the choice of venue. There was an email out, and I tried to responded with an email today. The venue for the budget hearing, I think back probably in July, Denise and I had talked a little bit about basically moving City Hall into a place where we could do hybrid meetings. Okay, and as we talked about that, and she investigated it, it looked at it. It turned out that we faced some technical issues with our own Memorial Hall, and there's some expense involved. So as we got closer and closer to the budget meeting, which had been scheduled last year, we started looking at other venues. We contacted the City of Colorado Springs and El Paso County. El Paso County seemed to be the most accommodating. They had a facility that we felt it would work well, and we also. We were under the impression or made the assumption that we'd be able to have a remote capability there, so that would be a hybrid meeting. We'd be able to bring people in. People who wanted to participate remotely would be able to do that. It was only recently we found out that their security system doesn't allow certain applications like Zoom to be used. So the intent was and it has been to do it hybrid, and now we're finding out that that's not a possibility. I guess there's a little bit of investigation as to see if Skype could be used. That remains to be, I think, investigated and get a decision on that. So that's where that is. The intent really was to give people an option, but there was just I didn't foresee the security system. Judy? I'm sorry, you see, raise your.
Sure, just to follow up, we do have the capability of using Skype as a phone call. So if we have somebody who cannot be there on the council, we just will need to provide their phone number to the IT people there, and they can go ahead and get them hooked up on Skype so they don't have to physically be there.
That would be great then. So if
We
you
do have that
want,
capability.
okay, great. If you want to do a remote participation with the budget meeting, I would suggest if you get your contact information to Judy, she can get it forwarded to the appropriate people at the county. So, Julie, you had a question?
Yes, Judy, would you just give my contact information to those people, or do you want me to call you tomorrow and ask you?
No, that's fine. I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll just give him your cell phone number, and that would be the phone that you'd be using, correct?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure.
And then I just have a council correspondence thing if you're done, John.
Yeah, I'm done. Go ahead.
Oh, just, I called Regional Building Department, and I spoke with the city, with the regional building attorney over there, Gina. And she explained to me, I was asking about the Pawnee Avenue situation, and she did explain to me that Colorado Springs has some kind of a app that they use, or some technical thing where every time their fire department takes care of any kind of fire, they automatically send some message about that over to Regional Building Department, and that they that expedites the process of regional knowing it right away what's going on and whether they should investigate and such, or at least they'll initiate a call to the city and say, hey, this looks pretty serious. Do you want us to do the 17-point evaluation to see if the building is dangerous? Do you want us to get started on that now? And apparently she said she had suggested to Denise that we're allowed to set up an app like that too, and we're allowed to have the form she uses. I think she said it was an app, there's some kind of form, and she said, yeah, I told Denise that Manitou can participate in doing this as well, and that might help move things along in the future anytime there's a fire. So I thought that sounded hopeful, and hopefully Denise will do that. Did that sound like something, Denise, that was doable?
Yeah, it's a form, it's not an app. And so I spoke with our fire chief, and he's looking at it and going to see what that entails, and will get back with me. So he's looking at it right now, because it's really the fire department that fills it out and they send it over.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
One thing I forgot to mention, I did have a chance to look at the budget book. I think it was waiting to be finalized with a couple of things, but it's really, I think, quite a usable document. So I'm encouraged by that. I'd like to thank Becca and her staff, and I know Alex did a lot of wordsmithing and formatting. So, and also to Denise. I think the budget documentation is probably the best the city's ever seen. So I won't say I'm looking forward to Saturday, but I think it's going to be a lot easier because of that. So Denise, if you'd extend our appreciation to them, that would be good. Great. Okay, let's get to the city administrator's report. Mr. Cheney.
So Mayor Graham, I received your email on the folks on Ruxton with the rent doubling in November. So I did visit them today and bring them some documents from the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments senior section to try to assist them in finding new homes, I guess, because they cannot afford the new pricing. So they were, their spirits were higher today, because at least they have somewhere to call now and try to find some information. So that's all I have.
Great. Thank you for doing that. It's very good of you. Thank you. Denise?
October 6th is Karen Share Food. The Karen Share is at the pool from 11 to 12. So I just want to remind everybody that October 6th, as the mayor said, GFL, we've been in contact with them. We also explained to them that they cannot put on an email that to leave trash out overnight. So we talked to them about that. We're asking them, seeing if we can get them to do like a Facebook or a text or something, because not everybody checks emails every day. So we talked about that with them. So we're working on it. And then Councilor Shada, I'll look and see what we can do with reimbursement. Let me do some research. I did go to Beehive today. They opened today. It's a beautiful facilities and really wonderful to have that in our community. So I do want to do that. I also got a text about the public meeting, and it looks like it's rescheduled. Hopefully will be the week of October 12th for the public meeting on Becker's Bridge. So I did get a text, and I'll make sure I'll confirm that, but that's what it looks like, is it's the week of October 12th for that. The budget books are available to pick up tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Last year, we did not have the budget books ready until the day of the budget meeting. So we are a little ahead this year that you can look at it before the budget meeting, which is great. I do have to shout out to Alex and all of finance. It's OpenGov this year is how we did the budget book, and it took tremendous amount of time from Alex, probably over 100 hours to get it to work correctly, along with all the work that finance did to make sure that the numbers worked. So shout out to all of them. I believe that's all the updates that I have.
Great. Well, that completes everything for tonight. So I think we can go ahead and call it a meeting and let's adjourn. Okay. Y'all have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.